Hey everyone, it's Jessica with So Many Creations. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be making the road trip bag. This is one of my favorite bags, but I will admit it is a very time-consuming bag. And the reason is there's a lot of pieces and they're big. So it does take some time to do your cutting and your fusing, but the bag is so worth it. We're gonna go through all of the pieces and the steps today. Let's take a look at the bag first. So this is an overnight bag. So the thing I love about this bag the most is that it's the perfect size for a weekend getaway. It fits under your seat on the plane, or you can use it overhead. It's not too big that it's taking up a ton of space, but it's just the right size for all of your necessities. On the front here, there's two pockets. You can use various closures. In today's video, I'll be using the flip locks as shown here. So there's two nice size pockets to put whatever you need quick access to. I'll also show you how to add a handmade tag. The bottom of this one is made out of cork. You can do yours out of fabric. I like to do cork because it is water resistant and it gives it a little bit more structure. There's some short handles right up at the top here. On the back is a zippered pocket, as well as this handle right here, which fits right over the handle of your suitcase. Great for traveling when you have lots of bags to carry. On the top here, it has a big double zipper, opens really, really wide. Inside there are no pockets. You can always add them if you like, but I find since it's an overnight bag, I'm fine with just having the one large compartment. You'll see on the sides here, you have your tabs, and that's where you're going to attach your handle. So this long adjustable handle here is perfect to wear over your shoulder, or you can even wear it crossbody. It's nice and wide, and it's very sturdy. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of our pieces and get started. I've already gone ahead and done all of my cutting and fusing, but let's go through all of the pieces and also talk about some of the options that you have. So I have two pieces here that are labeled A. These are for the top part of the bag. This is going to be where the zipper is attached. So this is the very top of the bag. You can use a contrasting color if you would like for that. I've got my two pieces right here for B. B is going to be the main part of the bag. It's going to be where the pockets on the front, as well as the pocket and handle on the back, are placed. So these are the main front and back of the bag. I have two pieces for C. This is going to be for that front pocket. So it is two pockets, but it's actually made as one lower unit with two flaps, and I'll show you how to do that. So I have two pieces cut, and those have fusible on them, as well as my A and B pieces. Because I am using a canvas, I've already gone ahead and added decor bond to all of these pieces. If it doesn't have interfacing, I'll let you know that it doesn't, and also why it doesn't. So these are four pieces. These are my Ds. This is going to be for those flaps, so it's the front and back of each of the flaps. E right here, E does not have any interfacing. This is for the zippered pocket in the back. If you've watched any of my videos or done any of my patterns, you know what piece this is. This is just the inside of the zippered pocket itself. I don't put any interfacing on, and especially with a canvas like this, I don't find that it needs anything extra. I have my F right here, and I've already gone and fused this. This is that back luggage handle, and you'll notice that my interfacing is about 1 inch short on each end. That is done intentionally. I'll show you why when we get to making this handle and preparing it. So for this, regardless of cotton or canvas, I am interfacing it, and I am making sure it's short on both of the shorter ends. For the bottom of my bag, I am doing cork. So these are my G pieces. I've added fusible to these as well. And that might seem kind of strange, especially if you are newer to cork or if you've used cork and never been instructed to add any interfacing. The reason I do on this particular bag is because it's an overnight bag and I like it to have some structure. I want it to stand up on its own regardless of what I have inside of it. It's also going to go possibly on the floor of a car or a train or an airplane. So I just like to make sure it's extra protected. This is cork is water resistant, so I'm not concerned about the cork, but by having the interfacing on here, it really makes it sturdy, gives it a lot of structure, and it adds one extra layer that any liquid would have to get through. If anything was coming out of the bag or into the bag, I've unfortunately ruined tote bags on planes before by setting them on something wet, so that just gives me a little bit of extra protection. It's not necessary, but the cork is so soft and pliable that on the bottom, I like to have interfacing. And it is the decor bond. It did shrink a little bit on the edges because you do need to fuse on the decor bond side. which is a polyester product. It's not a cotton based, so it does shrink a little bit. I'm not super concerned about that though. It's just giving me a nice sturdy bottom. I've also gone ahead and I have my handles cut here, but I haven't done anything with them yet. I'm going to show you how to prepare those. So for my top handles, these are my H pieces. I actually cut them out of cork. I had enough cork left over from the piece for the bottom, so I wanted to do those out of cork just to kind of tie the color scheme together. I think it looks really nice, and if I have enough, why not? So the only difference for these from the pieces in the pattern is that I didn't interface them because they're just a short handle, and I cut them half of the width. So the pattern is going to instruct you a little bit differently because it's based on cotton. I cut these half of the width rather than the full width that's in the pattern, and I'm not interfacing them, and I do have two pieces. In the pattern, you would be preparing one piece out of cotton that's already interfaced and cutting it in half. I'm just starting with two pieces. My handles are right here. These are my I and J pieces. So I have two with the fabric strips from my canvas, and I have two strips of interfacing. I have not fused these together because I need to sew these first and then interface them, and I will show you how to do that and give you some tricks on that. And for my lining, I've chosen to go with a waterproof canvas. First of all, it is waterproof, so it's going to help if there's any spills inside or outside of the bag. I'm not super concerned since I have this. It also cut down on some of my time. I want to say I spent probably a good 2.5 hours doing all of my prep work. Like I said, the bag is totally worth it, but there is a lot of prep work and they're big pieces. So you do need your big cutting mat and you need some room. So when you have big pieces like that, the interfacing itself takes a lot of time. And there are going to be times when you fuse all of your interfacing, you think it's good, and you go to use that piece and there's kind of air bubbles and pockets where it didn't get fused. That is very typical. It's nothing you've done wrong, but it's because of the size of the piece. So I'm using the waterproof canvas. This is my front side right here, and the rubbery side would be the back. Because of the waterproof canvas, I don't need to interface. However, if this was a cotton fabric, like it would normally be, like a lot of you will be using, you are going to interface the entire piece with decor bond. So your entire K pieces will have decor bond from edge to edge. You're also going to grab some fusible fleece. And if you don't have fusible fleece, you can use fusible thermolam. You could even try foam if you're comfortable using a foam. You can also use a Decovil Light or Decovil Heavy, depending on your bag making skills and the structure you're looking for. I like the combination on cotton of decor bond and fusible fleece because it gives it just enough body and structure, but it's not hard for me to sew. So if these were cotton, I would fuse my interfacing first. Once that's fused, I'm going to fuse the fleece on top of it. The fleece is cut short. It's about 1 inch short all the way around. That's to keep it out of the seam allowance. So if you are choosing another interfacing or replacing this with another product, I would suggest you do the same thing, especially a foam. Some of the foams are soft and stable, will look amazing in this bag, but I wouldn't want them in the seam allowance. It will make things a lot more challenging. And as we get towards the end, you'll see why that is. So anytime I add something extra like this in any bag, I cut it short so it's not in the seams. It's just to give it some structure. So now that we have all of our pieces cut and fused and all of our fabric picked out, let's take a look at the hardware and the other things that we'll need. So as far as the other supplies needed, there is quite a bit of hardware on this bag. I want to go through a couple of options that you have, and then we'll also talk about some of the other items that you'll need. So first are going to be my zippers. I am using the Zipper by the Yard. I have the black with rose gold. This is plastic. This is not metal, even though it looks like metal. So what you want for this bag, for your top and your zippered pocket, is a plastic or nylon zipper that you can cut and sew over. It's going to be very important, especially for the finishing steps at the ends where your tabs are. You're going to need something that you can very easily sew over. This is a number 5 zipper. I like this size for this bag. I really like this size for most bags. I have my pulls as well. I did grab a pack of rivets. These are totally optional. You don't need them, but I am going to be using them for decoration and also for my handles. I will show you how you can sew your handles, but I'm going to use these for today. Again, totally optional, as well as a handmade tag, which is also an optional accessory, but I like to add that onto my bags. As far as the flaps of your front pockets, the sample I showed you had a flip lock, and that's what I'm gonna be using today. So the flip locks come in 3 pieces. You have the flip part itself, the open oval part, and then you have your washer. This is going to be the same installation as a twist lock, which is what is referenced in the pattern. So for me, these are completely interchangeable. The flip locks are a little bit larger, as you can see. Your twist lock is definitely much smaller, but it works really well on this size bag. It can definitely accommodate a flip lock. If you don't like or don't have either of these options, you can also use a magnetic snap. You can use the type of snaps that are set with your rivet setter. You could even use Velcro if you wanted, or a button. There's lots of options, so it's dependent on what you like on your bag. Today I am going to be using these, so I have 2 of these. I just wanted to show you some options. Because this is the style that I'm using, I also have a screwdriver. This does have screws on the back, and I also have my glue. These are gonna be really important, and I'll show you how we use those. For the handle, you're going to need a slider. You're also going to need 2 triangles. These are going to be where these swivel hooks hook into for the tabs. You do have some options. If you don't want to use a triangle, you could use a D-ring, you could use a rectangle ring. What I like about this is the fabric goes through here, so this part is sewn in, and just the circle is where this hook is going to go. So when this goes in here, it's a lot less movement than you get on, let's say, a rectangle ring where it's going to slide back and forth a lot. I just like how these look. I think they have a really professional finish. This is available in a kit on my website. And as with any of these supplies that I show, including the fabric, the interfacing, and all of the hardware, I do sell them on my website. This is a road trip kit. This comes with all of these pieces. The twist locks and flip locks are sold separately, just because I don't know what style you would like, and you have a few options. So as far as the hardware, that's gonna be it for that. You're also going to want your pins, of course. I'm going to be using the 1/4-inch fusible tape for my zippered pocket. Clips, I always have lots of clips around, and for this bag, the more the better, because again, the pieces are really large. I have my marking tools. I always have a chalk pencil and a pen. I have my seam ripper and my stiletto, my scissors, and all of my basic supplies. My sewing machine, I'll be using my 1/4-inch foot, my blind hem foot for 1/8-inch stitching, and my zipper foot. I also have my cutting mat, my ruler and rotary cutter, and I have matching thread. For this entire bag, I'm just gonna be using black. So I'm actually using a pre-wound bobbin in my machine. I find that I get a little bit more thread out of that. And since I'm just using a basic black, it was pretty easy to find and match. So let's go ahead and get started on our bag. So let's go ahead and talk about handles. For steps 3, 4, and 5, we're gonna be preparing handles. And I like to do them all at the same time because I'm going to be using the same thread, the same feet, and I'm gonna be doing basically the same thing to each of them with some very minor little changes. I like to get them all prepared at the same time and then sit and sew them all at the same time. So let's go through each of the steps so that you can see what you're going to do. So for step 3, it's going to be preparing your short handle. So this is your H. Earlier, you had cut 3 strips of fabric and 3 strips of interfacing. For this, I am using cork. If you are using cotton, you would have one of your strips already fused, and I'll show you how to do the folding on that in just a minute. For me, because I'm doing cork, I have 2 pieces here. With fabric, I would just be cutting it in half when I was done sewing. I find that I like to keep everything in longer pieces and do my top stitching and then go back and trim. So for the cork, I have 2 pieces. So one will be for each side of the bag for the short handles. So all I'm going to do is I'm just gonna fold these in half, just like this, meeting up those raw edges right there. You can use some clips if you find it helpful. I find that I'm better without the clips. And I'm just gonna fold it like so, take it to my machine and do my top stitching. If you don't like this raw edge here, you can definitely mark the center and fold each of your edges inward like that, and then do your top stitching in the middle as well as the sides. Totally up to you. I'm just gonna fold them in half. So for me, these are already set to go. I can take them to my machine. Let's talk about the tabs and the long handle. So these are gonna be your 2 remaining fabric strips as well as your interfacing. Now I haven't interfaced them yet. First thing I did is I trimmed from one of them. As per the pattern, I trimmed a strip. That's gonna be for my tabs. I do still have my selvage on here because I'll just trim that off afterwards. This is going to get folded and top stitched the same way, but this has no interfacing. because of the placement of the tabs, you don't want any interfacing that's going to make this super bulky. Unless you are using a heavy duty machine, an interfaced piece for your tabs is going to be really difficult on your domestic. So I've trimmed a piece. I'll show you how you're going to do your folding, but you're going to treat this just like the rest of them. I have my remaining pieces and I went ahead and sewed them together. So I have a seam in the center here. Don't worry that one of my pieces is longer than the other because I trimmed for my tab. That doesn't matter. You'll never know in the end. So I sewed my pieces end to end, 1/4 inch seam, and I pressed it open. So now what I'm going to do is go to my ironing board and I'm going to take my interfacing. I have 2 strips and I'm going to start at one end and I'm going to short it a couple of inches. I want to make sure that I have a few inches on each of my ends that doesn't have interfacing. That's going to be for adding hardware later, and that's going to help to again eliminate some bulk. I'm going to do all of my prep work. I'm not going to do the hardware until I'm done, and I'll show you how to do the hardware so we can do that together. So I'm just going to fuse this down. I fuse all the way down the entire length, and when I get down here, I just take my second strip. I don't butt it. If you do this, you're going to get a weak spot in your handle. So I overlap it just slightly, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. That little bit of an overlap will keep this from making a permanent crease and making a weak spot. And I'll just keep fusing all the way down to the end. And when I get to this end, I'm also going to leave a couple of inches. So I want to make sure that I have not fused my interfacing all the way to the end on this handle. Lastly, I have for step 5, my luggage handle. And I've already gone ahead and fused this so I can show you how you're going to fold this with your iron. So on the back of my piece, you'll see that my interfacing is short on each end. The reason for that is because when it comes to the finishing steps, these will all have hardware or a seam to be sewn into, so you won't see the raw edges. This will not. This is going to be completely exposed. So I want clean edges all the way around. So when I go to the ironing board with this, the first thing I'm going to do is fold these edges over like this to tuck them in and make them nice and clean, just like so. And then the way that you're gonna fold all of your handles, so this applies to your long adjustable handle, your short handles if you're using cotton, as well as this, is you're just going to fold right down the center, like so. You're gonna press a nice crease into the center. Then you're going to fold each of your edges inward like so, like that, and then give it one final press. You can again use clips if you need to. This handle will be the only one that has really clean ends, and I'll show you how that looks before I top stitch. The rest of them will have raw edges because again, they will be finished later. So I'm gonna head to my iron. I'm gonna get all of my fusing and my pressing done, and then I'll come back and show you where to top stitch and what feet I like to use. I pressed all of my handles at the iron so they are all folded and prepared for top stitching. So again, these are my short handles. I don't have to do any prep work for these. I'm just going to fold them in half and do my top stitching 1/8 and 1/4 from each side. Right here I have my tab. This is not interfaced, it's all folded. And then I also have my F piece for my luggage handle. So let's take a look. Again, I took this to the ironing board and I folded it in half, wrong sides together, pressed it. Then I folded each of my edges inward, just like this, right to that center crease, and then gave it one more press to make it nice and crisp. So this is all ready for top stitching. Because this is going to be cut into 2 pieces for my tabs, there's no interfacing, and I didn't trim off my selvage. I can do that afterwards. So I have my piece all ready to go. For my luggage handle, I don't have any raw edges on the ends. This is the only one that's a little bit different. I have my ends right here folded under first, and then I've done the same folding, fold down the center, fold in towards the center, and fold again. Because this will be completely exposed, I don't want to have any raw edges, so these are nice and clean right here. And then I also have my adjustable handle. So this is really long. And as far as the length is concerned, this is a very long handle. If you are a little bit short on fabric, or let's say you're using a fabric that's not quite, 44 inches, if you have a little bit less, it's okay. You will be fine with anything from about 52 inches or longer. This one is probably all of 75 to 80 inches. It's much longer than it needs to be, but that's okay. So for this one, again, I sewed my pieces end to end, so I have one long piece. I interfaced. I don't worry about where that seam is as far as the interfacing is concerned. I have shorted my interfacing on each end, so I have a couple of inches. Again, I didn't trim off my salvages because I always do that at the end. It's just a habit that I have. I left a couple of inches without interfacing, but I'm still going to fold it and top stitch it the same way. That's going to be to eliminate some of the bulk when it's time to put the hardware on. I have my interfacing all the way around. When I ended on one interfacing piece, I took the other and just overlapped it about 1/4 of an inch. You can't even tell where it is. The reason I do that is so I don't get a permanent bend in my handle. I interfaced all the way down to the other end, and again, this end has no interfacing, just for a couple inches. Treat it the same as the rest of your bag, or excuse me, the rest of your handle. Even though it's not interfaced, you still want to fold it and you still want to top stitch it. When we get to the hardware in the next step, I'll show you why that's important. So now that I'm ready, I can take this to my machine and do all of my top stitching. This is why I like to get all of my prep work done, because I have to top stitch all of these handles. And whatever I do on one, I'm going to do on the rest. So what I like to do, especially on a wide handle like this, is I like to do 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to be using my blind hem foot. I've talked about this in a lot of videos. I actually have a separate video on how I use this, but basically this is a blind hem foot and it has a guide in the center. I'm gonna move my needle position as far left as it will go, and I just run this right along the edge of my fabric. It gives me a beautiful 1/8 inch top stitch. When I do top stitching, I also do both sides. I've seen a lot of bag makers only do it on one side. They do it on the open side. I like to do it on both. I like symmetry, and I think it looks a little bit more professional and finished. So I'm gonna do 1/8 of an inch on both sides, and then I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot with a flange, and I'm gonna do the same thing, 1/4 of an inch on both sides. When I top stitch, I do like to increase my stitch length to about a 3.5, and I am matching my top and bobbin thread. In some of my other videos, I have not done that, and sometimes it ends okay and sometimes it doesn't. So because I have mostly black handles and then this dark teal, I'm just gonna use black in the bobbin and the top. I'm gonna get these all prepared, and then I'll show you how to add your hardware to your adjustable handle as well as your tabs. Before I head to the sewing machine, I forgot to mention one thing. This is mentioned in your pattern, but I just wanted to let you know as well. This is my F, which is my luggage handle, the piece that has clean ends. When I top stitch this, I will be top stitching all the way around. So on my regular handles, I'm just doing my long edges, but on this one, because I need nice clean ends that are going to be sewn to the back of the bag, I do top stitch the short ends and the long sides as well. Just wanted to mention that before I started sewing. I did all the top stitching on all of my handles. So for step 3, to complete my short handles, I just did my top stitching and then made sure to cut it in half. I started with 2 pieces. You would be cutting your cotton piece in half if you're using cotton. So these are all set for now. I did cut mine a little bit longer than the pattern said because I had the cork, and you can always go a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. They're just a short top handle, so it's not really pertinent. So that is all set. I'm gonna set that aside. I'm gonna skip to step 5, which is the luggage handle, because I don't have anything else to do with this one. Just wanted to show you that I did top stitch all the way around all 4 sides. So it is all set to go. I don't have any raw edges. All of my edges are nice and clean, so this is all set. I'm gonna put that aside for now as well. So to complete step 4, I've gone ahead and trimmed my tab piece into 2 as per the pattern. Again, this does not have any interfacing. And I have my long adjustable handle here. It's all top stitched. I still have my ends right here. I cleaned them up a little bit and cut off the salvage, but these ends do not have any interfacing, and that's going to be for adding the hardware. So for the hardware, for the tabs, you're gonna be using your triangles. Again, you can also substitute D-rings or rectangle rings if you prefer. I'm gonna be using the triangles. And I'm going to show you where to sew, but I'm actually going to be using my rivet press and some rivets to do mine. So for the tab, you're just gonna take your piece like this, just loop that through and fold it in half. And I like to sew in 2 places. I like to sew down here close to the edge to keep these ends secured. I'm gonna sew about 1/8 of an inch just once across. And then I'm going to get as close to my hardware as I can. I'm usually about 1/4 to a half inch away. And I'm gonna stitch back and forth a few times to secure this. I wanna make sure that this is not going to flip around at all, especially if I'm using a D-ring or a rectangle ring. These triangles have a lot less, are a lot less likely to turn. But I wanna stitch just to keep that nice and secure. I'm gonna do that on both of these, and when they're done, I'll set those aside. I'm not gonna need these again until the end, but make sure that you put them somewhere safe. So what I'm going to do is actually stitch the ends about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm gonna add some rivets on each of these. So that's how I'm gonna do my finishing. For my long handle, what I'm going to do is add my slide first, and then I'll add my swivels. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my slide, and I'm just gonna I hold it between my fingers so that the bar is like kind of towards the middle. I'm gonna take this piece and I'm gonna come up and over this bar. So just like this, I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna come over. What I'm gonna do is slide this until it kind of hits the top of the inner facing, so it's not really going too much further. And because I have fabric here, I wanna hide these raw edges. So I'm going to fold this once, like so, and then bring this down so it's on top of the inner faced part. And I'm gonna stitch back and forth a few times to secure this. Because I'm using canvas, this is a little bit thicker. It's a little harder on my machine, but it will still work. Again, I'm going to use rivets for this part. Because I'm gonna do that, I'm just gonna pretend that they're already done, so I'll just put a clip here. So once this is riveted or sewn, the next step is to take one of your swivel hooks. So here's how I always like to do this. I fold my handle in half, so this is the part that is going to be folded and sewn. Make sure that this is not twisted at all, and I take my swivel hook and I add that so the swivel hook is facing out, just like this. So my swivel hook is facing out, my folded edge is in towards the center. This swivel hook stays loose, so I'm just pushing it out of the way. Then I'm gonna take this end, I'm again gonna take this up, and this time I'll go a little bit further, over this center bar, just like that. Loop that around, that's going to make it adjustable. And now I'm going to add this swivel hook to this end. So this swivel hook is facing up. This is kind of the inside part. This swivel hook is going to face out as well, just like that. I'm going to fold this end once, fold it twice, bring it right to that interfacing part, and again, sew across here or add some rivets. My long adjustable handle and my tabs are all set, so let's take a look at those. For the tabs, I did use 2 rivets on each of those. I still sewed across the bottom. I just find that down here, I still like to have these edges sewn together. It's about 1/8 of an inch. It's going to help for the finishing steps to not have to worry about anything shifting, plus it helped with my rivets. So normally I just kind of wing it with the rivets. This time I did measure, and I measured over about 1/2 inch on each side. I didn't want to cut through or cover up any of my top stitching, so I'm really happy with how that looks. I could have spaced them a little bit further apart, but I'm happy with that. So I just used 2 on each of those. These are 8mm rivets. I did use my ProMaster punch to make the holes, and then I used my rivet setter. So these are all set. I will not need these again until the very end, so I'm just gonna set those aside for now. And as far as my adjustable handle, I didn't do any stitching for my hardware. I used rivets for the whole thing. You can absolutely use your sewing machine. You don't have to have a rivet setter or use rivets for this bag. I just kind of wanted to try them out. I hadn't done a bag like this, a road trip bag with rivets, and I wanted to show you how they looked. So on this end, I have my fabric folded over twice. My raw edge is hidden in here. I didn't use any fray check or anything on there. You absolutely can. And with a canvas like this, it's probably not a bad idea because these do fray a little bit more than cotton, I find. This is the end down here that did not have any interfacing, so it was quite easy to put my rivets through. It's a little thick, but it worked fine. Again, I could have stitched this. It's not a problem at all. So this swivel hook is attached. This one stays in place. The other one is right here. This one stays loose. So this does not get stitched or riveted down. This is going to need to stay loose so that when I adjust my handle and make it in different lengths, I can still move this one around. On the end down here, this was the other end that did not have interfacing. I used 2 rivets to attach this to my slider. I have the other end coming up and over that. And there is my swivel hook. So let me tighten this up a little bit so you can see it. Make this as small as I can. So there's my 2 swivel hooks. Those get attached to the tabs. And then I have my slider and I can make it whatever length I need it. So this is not actually going to get sewn into the bag. It's complete now. Because it has the swivel hooks, it will just get attached to the tabs when the bag is done. So this I'm gonna set aside for now. I'm gonna set my tabs aside and all my other handles, and I'm gonna move on to my next step. So for step 6, you're going to prepare your front pocket base. These are my C pieces. These are fabric that have interfacing on the back. I do have a slightly directional fabric. I guess it really doesn't make a huge difference, but to me, this looks like it's the top. If you have a directional fabric, make sure that you are paying attention to that for this as well. So what I'm going to do is put these 2 pieces right sides together, just like this, and I'm going to sew the sides as well as the top. Again, make sure that you know which is your top, and you're gonna just sew across here. So I'm gonna do a 1/4 of an inch, make sure to backstitch. I'm gonna go up, across, and back down. Then I will turn this right side out and give it a good press, and I will top stitch right across that top edge as well. You can do an 1/8 or a 1/4, whatever you would like. So I'm gonna go prepare this now. Before turning this piece right side out, this is just a little extra thing that I do. It's not really talked about in the pattern, but I just thought that I would show you. Anytime I have something like this where I want to get nice crisp points, I just trim a little bit out of my corner. And you can see I've reinforced a little bit with my stitching as well. So I just trimmed a little, and then I'm gonna turn this, and I just kind of put my finger, my thumb and my index finger there and pop that corner out, just like that. And then before I take it to the ironing board, I'm gonna use my little point turner and poke that right into the corner. But I love this turning tool. So now my corners are nice and even. I'm gonna take this to the ironing board, give it a good press, and then I'm gonna top stitch right across this top folded edge. I took my pocket base back to my machine and I top stitched right across here after I gave it a really good press. I don't do anything with the sides because those are gonna get sewn down in a little bit, and the bottom is still open, which is really important for the next step. So I just chose to do a 1/4 of an inch top stitch. One little note, normally when I top stitch anything like handles or anything like that, I don't back stitch because they're usually gonna be caught in a seam. But because this edge is kind of exposed here and I'm gonna be stitching it down to something else, I did back stitch just a couple of stitches on here. So what I've already done, you might have noticed here, is I measured and I found the center of my piece and I drew a chalk line. This I'm going to sew over, so I just want something just dark enough for me to see it. I'm not sure if it's picking up on camera for you, but I just want a light mark right here. I also found the halfway point on each of these sides as well, and you may not see these marks, but with my chalk pencil, I just made a light mark and I measured 1 inch down from the top. So everything I'm doing is being measured from the top finished edge. The reason for this is because I'm going to add on my twist locks. So the twist lock part, my flip lock. The flip part right here, this is going to be added onto these pockets. The open half, which is this half right here, that's going to be added to my flap. So I don't need that half just yet. To add these on, I need to find the center and I need to make sure that they're both the correct measurement down, and I want to make sure that they're even. So here's a couple of tips for these before we get into cutting. Depending on what type of hardware you have, you may have one of 2 styles of washers. You might get this style of washer, which just has the 2 openings for your prongs, or you might get this kind right here that has several. Sometimes we get these because they work with multiple pieces of hardware. When it comes to this, it's easy to just count and find the center so you can align that onto your piece. But what do you do with this where you don't have a center opening? I actually turn them over and I just mark with a Sharpie. I kind of measure out with my ruler and I find the center. I just find that easier to make sure that when I put this on, this is in the center. I don't have one that's a little bit too far right or left. I don't want them to be off because I want my bag to look as precise as I can. So I have my mark here. And I can actually use my ruler too, just to keep this straight. So again, I'm 1 inch down from the top. I'm gonna line up that center mark with the center mark that I already drew, just like that. And once that's in place, now I'm going to mark with my chalk pencil inside these 2 slits. If you have this style washer, just find which 2 you need to use, which ones fit on your flip lock, and you'll know which ones to mark. So I'm gonna do the same thing over here. Line up my ruler 1 inch from the top edge, put my center marks together and mark. And now when it comes to the cutting, the reason we want this bottom edge open, I'm only cutting through this top layer. If you cut through both, when you use the pocket, you're gonna have the washer on the back, and we don't want that. So you're gonna take your seam ripper or your small scissors and just put this in each of your little marks and cut. And I'd rather that my cuts are a little on the small side. I want my piece to be snug rather than having these slits be too big and have them poke out and have any my fabric kind of fray. And now I'm going to take this piece right here and my washer and a little scrap of interfacing. And I'm going to put this into my pocket. Let me grab my other one as well. I've got my other washer and my other flip part. So I'm going to just reach my hand up in here, take this, and I'll straighten out those the little prongs here. Sometimes they're crooked. Put that right through. And if you want, you can absolutely add a little bit of glue underneath if you want to do that. I use the glue mostly for the other half, but if you would like to, you can put just a little dab right here just to reinforce it. I have always liked to add a little bit of glue just because I find that, I don't know, it makes me feel a little bit better. So if you don't have glue, that's fine. So I'm just gonna put that through like so. Take a look, make sure it looks even. I wanna make sure that it's lined up here if I don't have to adjust anything. And now I'm just gonna turn this over, take my little scrap of interfacing, and I just fold it 2 or 3 times. This is just to give it a little bit of extra padding and to give a little bit of space between the washer and the pocket so that it doesn't rip. Now I take my washer and put that on top and then fold the prongs inward. And I'll turn this over and just kind of give it a push. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. All right, so those are both in place. And now the front of my pocket is all set. I've got my little flip blocks. What I love about these is that they can go up or down. To me, down always looks right. What do you do? Do you like yours to flip down or to flip up? I'm just curious because my brain always says down is correct. But this is all done. I'm going to get ready to get my flaps prepared, and I'm going to move on to my next step. For step 7, we're going to make the flaps. So you're going to need your 4D pieces. And I just wanted to show you there is an option here if you want to do this little angle that I have. You can leave your pieces completely rectangular. You can cut this little angle right here. All I did was use my ruler and my mat, and I just measured over 1 inch and up 1 inch and just cut a little diagonal. You can also round them if you want. It's totally up to you. You can be as creative as you want. So I like how these look when they have a little bit of an angle to them. So you have 4 pieces here. Be very cautious, again, if you have a directional fabric. I make sure that my top edge, my direction is going this way. This is going to be the bottom. I have had people in classes do one this way and one the opposite way so that when they're in the bag and you lift it up, this one is still standing up. I don't mind that that's upside down. Let me grab the finished bag so I can show you. So on here, this is how it's going to look when it's finished. So here's the part we just did. So this little flap right here, you want to make sure that these are upright, but I've had people cut this one so that this is upright. So one would be up and one would be upside down. To me, the back does not matter, but you'll decide that for yourself. So I've gone ahead and trimmed all of these. I'm going to put them in pairs, right sides together, just like this. Take this to my sewing machine, stitch 1/4 inch starting here, going down, across here, and back up, leaving this top edge open. So your longest top edge is going to stay open. I'm going to get those prepared just like I did for the bottom part. I'm going to stitch them, turn them right side out, press, and then I'm going to top stitch again these edges that I just sewed. I'm not going to do anything with these top edges. My flaps are pressed and I went ahead and top stitched. I did all of the edges that I sewed. So my top edge is still open here, which is totally fine. We don't need the top edge for the next piece of hardware like we did on the bottom, but that's going to get sewn into a seam, so it won't matter. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and found the center of each of them, and I've made a little mark with my chalk pencil. That is really probably not going to pick up on camera, but it's enough for me to see. So you can make your mark with whatever you would like. The marks that we're going to make, we're actually going to cut away. So don't worry about like what you use. If you use a regular pen, a chalk pencil, an erasable pen, it really won't make much of a difference, and I'll show you why. So I just made a light mark here. If you would prefer, you can use a pin, whatever is easier for you. And your bottom is going to be where you add your hardware. So the part that has the corners or the part that you sew, that's gonna be where this piece of hardware is added. So let's look at the other half of my flip lock. I have my 2 pieces here with screws in the back. And I've gone ahead and I've loosened and taken out most of the screws. Here's a little tip for you. If you're having a problem getting one of these screws out, it happens sometimes, especially in some of the darker colored hardware, and it's because of the plating process. If that happens and you just can't get the screw out, don't give up. Get a screwdriver that's a little bit bigger. This one is kind of the exact same size as the screws, which is what I would normally want. But if I can't get that screw out, increase the size and just give it one really good twist, and usually that's enough to get it going. You don't want to use such a large screwdriver that you strip it or that you ruin the threading on here, but just go up a little bit in the size of your screwdriver. So I have my 2 parts here for each of them. Don't lose those little screws. Make sure you know exactly where those are. You can set them in something magnetic, or if you have like a little piece of tape, you can stick them on. Just make sure you don't misplace those. I have my glue. I am going to need that. And I have my chalk pencil. I have a black background, so the chalk pencil shows up the best for me. Again, use whatever shows up best for you. And I'll show you how I like to do this. So even though this is the back, I'm going to use this to do my markings. And it does not matter what side I'm marking on. If this is my front or my front, it does not matter. So don't worry about that for right now. We're actually gonna be cutting through both layers, so it doesn't make a difference. So I'm just gonna show you on one. I'm gonna take my piece and I am eyeballing it in the center. If you want to use your ruler and measure, you absolutely can. I don't exactly know where the center of this piece is, but I'm just kind of looking, and that looks good to me. I'm happy with the placement. So I'm setting it right at my top stitching. I don't want to cut through my top stitching, and I don't want this too low that it's going to cause any issues. So I have a 1/4 inch top stitching. I'm setting mine right there. If you have 1/8 of an inch, you can set it on the 1/8, or you can set it about 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom. I'm going to take my chalk pencil and mark inside, just like that. And I'm also going to mark the screw holes. That's going to be really important. So now what I'm going to do is take my scissors, and I'm going to try to get this as close as I can to show you. And what I want to do is cut on the outside of this line. I want the edge of my scissors right on the outside of the line that I drew. So I just kind of fold this, make a little snip just to get it started. And I know this is really terrifying, but don't worry, you can do it. So I'm just cutting right on the outside, and when I get to the holes at the end, I'm going to kind of work to a point right around them. So can you see that I'm kind of cutting away the hole or the little circle as well? I need to have room for the screw holes. If you're more comfortable, you can draw it out. It shows you in the pattern how to do that. Or if you want to cut the center and then go back and cut a little bit more for the screw holes, that's fine. So the way that I'm going to check this to make sure it's large enough is I'm going to use the other half, the front half, because this has kind of this little groove around the center, and I need to make sure that this fits snugly over top of that. So I'm just placing that down and checking. I can see the screw holes, so I have plenty of room for those, and everything fits nice and snug, so I'm happy. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. Both sides are done, and I check them. Before I start adding my glue and adding the pieces on, I'm going to see which side I want to be the front. Which side do I want to face out? So I think on this one, I want this side to face out, and I think I want this side. So it doesn't make much of a difference with a lot of fabrics, but with this, I didn't fussy cut anything, but just the way that the flowers are, I kind of like this side better than the other sides. So what I'm going to do is take my glue, and I'm going to put glue on both halves. So I have my front and I have my back. On the back, I'm just putting a little dab, and I'm using the Gutermann HT2. This is a glue that I have used for years. I'm very happy with it. I do sell it. If you don't have this, you can also use E6000, that's totally fine. This glue does not dry immediately, so it's fine to put it on both of my pieces and let them sit for a minute. It's gonna be absolutely fine. So I'm just going to do all four. Again, a little bit on the back. I don't want this to get all over my fabric. If you get this on the metal or on the good side of your hardware, you can wipe it off with your fingertip or like your fingernail. If you get this on your fabric, it can leave a little bit of a clear, shiny mark, which we don't want. So let me put this away. You just want to have a metal to fabric compatible glue like this or an E6000. So I just kind of went around. I didn't go in the screw hole. You can put some in there as well if you want, or use a little bit of Loctite, anything you want that's going to make this feel more secure for you. As far as this opening, if you want to put a little bit of fray check around there, you can do that as well. So now I'm just going to push these pieces over. I have my front, the part with the groove, the smooth part, I have this face down. So I want this front face down. I'm just going to snip one more thread. Get rid of all the little threads that you can now. Place that just like so. If there's any threads, go ahead and get rid of them. Take one of my backs, put that with the groovy side up, not groovy, but grooved side up. And now I'm going to put my screws in. Make sure that those screw holes are completely clear of any bits of fabric, otherwise the screw is not going to go in all the way. And I just turn until the screw stops turning and it's flush. If your screw is not going flush, check to make sure that it's not crooked. Sometimes because they're so small, they can be a little crooked, or you might have some fabric in there. Just check that. So that is in place. There is the front, and I'm going to go ahead and do the second one. Both of my fronts are done, so this is all set. And before I go any further, I always like to check, because this just makes me feel really accomplished. I'm going to take the base unit and put one, and they should touch or be very close to touching in the center, right on your center line, and that's how it's going to look in your bag. So if you're unhappy with the placement or patterns, you can always switch them around, see if that works a little bit better for you. And I think this way worked a little better. I was off just a hair on one of them because I didn't measure completely for my pieces, but once this is in the bag, I'm gonna be totally fine. So these pieces are done. I can set this aside for now. I'm ready for step 8, so I've grabbed my 2 A pieces and I've also grabbed my short handles, my H pieces. So mine are out of cork, yours might be out of fabric, either or. And what I've done is I've already gone ahead and found the center on each of these, and I just made a light mark indicating where I need to line up my handles as per the pattern. The measurement is always going to be on the inside of your handles. And again, if you have a directional fabric, what I like to do is make sure that this is the bottom, so this would be right side up, and my handle would be placed this way. I like to make sure of that. I find that it just helps a little bit. I don't use a ton of directional fabrics, but if you are, just kind of be cautious of that. So I have my marks. I'm just going to take a few clips here, and I'm going to place the inside edge on my mark here, which I've measured out from the center. My center is right here, and I'm going to make sure that I don't twist this. You don't want your handle to twist because it's very hard to tell sometimes. I'll show you. If I put this one on, grab these clips let's say that I clip this part right here, and then I take this and I do it just like that. It kind of looks right, but I can tell that I have a folded edge here and I have a folded edge here. They should actually be facing each other. And when I look at this handle, there's a weird twist in it. So you want to make sure that your handle is actually flat. It's very important, but it's also really easy to do, and that's something that's common in a lot of bags. So just be really careful with that. Got some extra clips here. So now that I have this ready and I can check and see that my handle is not twisted, I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch down here within the seam allowance about 1/8 of an inch back and forth to secure. I'm going to do that on both sides of my handle. Then what I'm going to do is draw some lines as per the pattern, and I'm going to make an X here. However, because I already used rivets on some of my other handles, I think I'm actually going to add rivets instead of the X. I will recommend that if you are going to do that X in the little box, draw it out. It seems small enough and it seems easy enough for you to take to your machine and just kind of eyeball it. Every time I try to do that, one of my lines is off and my X looks terrible. So just follow the pattern, either do the X or just stitch up, back and forth a few times and back down, or what I'm going to do is add some rivets up here. So I'm going to I finished up my short handles. I took them to the machine and I stitched down at the bottom less than 1/4 of an inch. I just went back and forth a few times to secure them. And then instead of doing any extra sewing or drawing a box and sewing it, I added some rivets, and I've not done this on this bag before, and I'm super happy with how it came out. Just a little bit different look. I think it just adds a little bit more polished professional look. So now that these pieces are done and my pocket and flaps are all set, which I'm going to take the tops off, now I'm ready to start assembling the front part of my bag. So I've grabbed one of my B pieces, and I've also grabbed my front pocket here. I have that line that I had drawn earlier that I didn't do anything with, and now is the time. So I've already marked the center on the B. I'm going to line up those 2 center marks, and you can of course use a ruler to make sure that you are spaced evenly here. I'm going to grab my clips and just clip this right across here. Again, if you have directional fabric, make sure that your fabric is right side up right here, facing, the print is facing up. So now that that's in place, I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew in a couple of different spots. I'm going to sew the center line right here. I'm also going to sew down my sides, and I'm going to sew the bottom. Do not sew the top. I know that might sound silly, but sometimes you get into the rhythm of sewing and you just end up sewing across. I've had it happen in every class I have ever taught for this bag. So I'm just telling you, don't do that. If you do, you're gonna have to get your seam ripper. So what I like to do is stitch across the bottom about 1/8 of an inch. That's going to be in a seam later, so I don't want it to be to show. Then I'm going to sew the sides and the center right on this line, and also about 1/8 of an inch on each edge. Use whichever foot works best for you. I'm gonna change to my blind hem foot. And when you're stitching, start down here at the bottom, stitch up to the top, turn, and come back down. Start at the bottom, up, turn, and back down, and do the same on this side. If you want to sew these 1/4 of an inch as well, you can absolutely do that. It's just gonna make them stronger. I'll probably do a double stitch on both sides, and then I'll just do the center right on this line. When I'm done, I will be ready to add my flaps. The base of my pocket is now sewn in place. I tried to trim all the threads here. I've missed a couple. Let me get those. So I essentially sewed 6 times. I sewed my sides 1/8 and 1/4, so they're nice and flat. I like when the pockets are really tight to the bag itself. If you just do the 1/4, they kind of stick up a little bit, and sometimes they'll fold over on themselves, which kind of drives me crazy. So I did 1/8 and 1/4. I also sewed the center and I sewed the bottom less than 1/4 of an inch. This pocket is not going anywhere. I don't know how, unless the entire bag went with it, it's not moving. So now that this is in place, I'm gonna add my flaps and finish up the front of my bag. As per the pattern, I went ahead and I drew with my chalk pencil a line. I measured down from the bottom and I drew it with my ruler. I made sure that the line is within the pockets. I didn't want it to extend outward. Even though it's a chalk pencil and I can erase it, you might be using something different, and I just don't want to see that kind of poking out over here. So this is going to be the line where I add my flaps. And before I pin them in place and get ready to sew, I do like to double check and just make sure that they are in the place that I want them. This is exactly how I want them lined up. Now, I made a very minor mistake somewhere along the way, either in my cutting or my sewing, or possibly in installing part of my hardware. And this pocket right here lines up perfectly on this edge. This pocket does not. It's about 1/8 of an inch off. So I just want to make sure that I remember that when I'm sewing. So what I'm going to do is just move this one up, and I'm going to line this up right on the line here. I know that they touch in the center, so I'm just going to make sure the base, the raw edge, is sitting on that line and my pocket is lined up here. I'm just going to use a couple of clips to clip that in place, just like that. And I'm going to grab a pin as well, just to make sure that when I get to the machine, nothing shifts. And I'm just going to put the pin through here. And then I'm going to do the same thing, excuse me, over here. So I know that these need to touch right in the center. So I'm just going to place that there. This clip, of course, needs to move. There we go. I'll add one more, just like that. And I'm going to add another pin. And if you need to pin thick layers, here's a trick to not bend your pins. Instead of putting your pin through and trying to dig it, up, poke your pin through all your layers and then take your layers and kind of fold them and push your pin through. Now I don't have a bent pin. So now these are in place. The raw edge is lined up right along that line. And as you can see, the bottom, the back part of the flap is facing up. My nice finish side, the front side, is facing down, because when these are finished, they're going to come down like this. I'm going to stitch across here 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to pull them down, check everything, and then I'll show you how to finish this up. I stitched across the bottom edge here using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And here's a question that I used to get asked all the time, and just in case you're wondering, I thought that I would address that too. So when I stitch, I do make sure that I backstitch, and I backstitch on each flap, so here as well as here. And at this intersection, even if they're not touching, should I go straight across? Should I keep sewing? The answer is it doesn't matter. I used to get asked that all the time. Should I just sew one flap, stop, and sew the other one, or can I sew all the way across? It really doesn't make any difference that I have seen. The only thing I would say is that if you have a little bit of a gap here and you don't want to see a couple of threads, maybe then you would just stitch each one. But it was just one of those questions I used to get asked all the time, so I thought I would let you know. So now I have these done, and I'm just going to take out my pins and my clips. And before I do any more stitching, I'm going to take this to the ironing board to make sure it's pressed perfectly. But first I want to double check. I want to make sure everything looks good. So I kind of just press with my thumb to make sure I don't get a weird crease. And I'll engage that one and that one as well. And that looks perfect. So I'm really happy with this. I'm going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to give this a good press. And again, I double check under here to make sure that this is nice and crisp, that I don't have any weird wrinkles or any kind of puckers there. Press this, and I'm gonna stitch across here about 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm gonna measure down about 1/2 inch and stitch. Here is the key though. Your measurement might be different than mine. If 1/2 inch does not cover up and completely enclose this raw edge, then you'll need to adjust that. So let me check. I'm just gonna see what mine looks like. Find my chalk pencil here. So if I look at the piece from the side, okay, can you see that? So if I measure 1/2 inch, I am just going to catch that edge. So I might even scoot that down maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch, because what I want to do when I'm sewing is make sure that when I open these up, I don't see any of this. I want to clean this up. I don't want to see my line, my stitching, any of that. I want to clean up those edges. Let me grab the finished bag and show you on here. So here's the part that we're working on right now. And when I open this, you can see that even though I have the flap up to here, it only opens just a little bit because I made my measurement to enclose that edge. I don't want to open this up and see a raw edge here. So make whatever measurement works for you. A 1/2 inch should do it. Yours might be 5/8 of an inch. It doesn't make a big difference as long as you're not sewing down to the top of the pocket, which you should not be. If you are, there is a mistake somewhere. So you might want to take your flaps off. But just make sure that your stitching, again, covers up that raw edge. And you can see here, I did my 1/8 to keep that nice and tight, and I did this, and let's see. This one ended up being a 1/2 inch. So I'm gonna measure and check mine. You measure and check yours as well, and I'm gonna go ahead and press and then do that stitching. My flaps are all sewn down, so when I open them, I don't see any of my raw edges. I don't see my lines. Everything is lined up really nicely because I took my time to make sure it was all planned out well, except this little error here, but we won't talk about that. So now that this is all done, I'm going to add my handmade tag. And I was kind of debating if I wanted to put it up here, if I wanted to put it down on the side. So I've decided that for this one, I'm gonna put it right up here. That way I don't forget, and I kind of like how it looks above the flap. If you want to add it to the cork or the bottom part, or you want to put it on your pocket down here, I would suggest waiting until you have the bottom pieces added on. I'm going to put mine up here, so I think it's a good time to do that. Since I know where the center is, I'm going to use that for my washer. And let me just see, I just like to check. All right, so my center is right there for my washer, and I need one in on each side. So I'm just going to make my mark, grab my seam ripper, which seems to be missing. So I'm just going to use my scissors, and I'm just going to make a little snip. And put that through. And then I'll just add my washer. This is not weight bearing, and I'm not really concerned about this the way I was on the flip lock, so I'm not adding that extra piece of interfacing, but I still fold my prongs over on top of each other. And now that's all set. So this piece is done. I'm going to put this aside and start working on the back. For step 11, we're going to be adding our zippered pocket to the back piece. So you're going to grab your other B, the one that does not have any pockets on it. You're also going to need your E, which is your square of fabric that does not have any interfacing. You'll need your zipper, your 1/4 inch fusible tape, and some pins. So as per the pattern, I've already marked the center, and I marked the box that I'm going to be sewing. You can see that my lines are much longer than they need to be, and that is totally fine. I'm just going to ignore that, and this is the back, so no one's going to see that. This is just on the interfacing. So I have my marks done. Now I'm going to take my pocket piece right here, and I'm going to place that right side up, and I'm going to place this right side down. So now these two pieces are right sides together. It does not matter how much of this pocket is sticking up on the top. So if you want to line it up or move it down, it does not make any difference. So don't worry about that. Just make sure that you have as equal as you can of seam allowance on each side. You can very easily find the center and line those up if you would prefer. So now I'm going to take some pins, and I'm just going to pin the 4 corners. Now I am going to walk you through this entire zipper as per the pattern, but if you would like a more in-depth detailed tutorial, I do have one on the YouTube channel that you can watch. It's going to give you a lot of extra tips and tricks. It's a great video to watch whenever you're doing a zippered pocket. So feel free to go ahead and watch that. For right now, I'm just going to kind of walk you through the way that the pattern explains it. So now that my pocket is pinned in place and it's not going to shift or flip up on me, I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew the outside of the box. I'm not concerned about any of these lines that are too long. I'm not worrying about the center line or the little triangles. I'm just sewing around the outside of the box. I'll bring it back and show you how to finish it up. I sewed just around the outside of this box. I'm leaving my pins in, and now I'm going to cut on this center line. I'm gonna cut from the point to the other point, and then I'll cut back. So what I'm gonna do is just take my scissors here and just kind of get this started. You can also use your seam ripper, whatever you find to be easier, or you can cut it with your rotary cutter. I'm just gonna cut right across. And when I get down to this V, I'm gonna cut right into this corner. So you wanna get as close to, without cutting through those threads as you can. Get right into that corner. And I'm cutting through the pocket as well as the back. That's why I left my pins in, so that I wouldn't accidentally cut anything incorrectly. Come down here. And right into the corner. Now my pen was not perfectly lined up when I drew that little V. I'm ignoring that. I'm just cutting right into the corner, not cutting through my threads. So now that I have that done, I'm going to take out my pins and pull my piece through to the back here. Just like that. And I'm going to take this to the ironing board, and I'm going to give this a really good press a really nice clean opening. So I want to be folding on that stitching, folding it back like this so that I have a nice clean opening. So I'm going to work my way around the back as well as the front, and then I'll show you how to add your tape and your zipper. I pressed my pocket nice and flat and made sure I made a nice clean opening. I pressed from the front as well as the back, and I did put my pins back in to keep my pocket flat. On the back side here, I used my fusible tape since I was already at the ironing board, and I just ironed a piece of tape on either of the long sides. I'm gonna peel the paper off now, and the point of this tape is to hold your zipper in place instead of pins, because pinning your zipper never comes out straight. So I have my zipper here all ready to go. So I'm gonna take this to the ironing board, but here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna lay my zipper right side up, just like this. I kind of just put the pull in the center, and I'm going to take this and put it on top. Rather than trying to work from the back where I can't really see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna line that up, get my zipper exactly where I want it, and press it in place. Once it's pressed, I'll take it to the machine, and I'll stitch about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch all the way around. I took my piece to the ironing board, fused my zipper in place, and then I stitched all the way around, about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. Now I'm gonna take out my pins and close up the pocket. So you're gonna turn your piece over to the back. First things first, trim off any excess zipper. We don't need that in the seam allowance. This end is fine. So the first thing I'm gonna do is take this top edge and the bottom edge and put those together, and sew right across there. Using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, make sure you backstitch. And once I have that done, I'm going to pull this down. I want this hanging down towards the bottom of the bag where it would naturally lay. So the zipper is up towards the top. I want the pocket to be hanging down, and then I'm gonna close up the sides. I'm not sewing the sides to the bag itself. I'm just gonna fold that back, stitch a 1/4 of an inch, fold that back, and stitch a 1/4 of an inch. My pocket is all closed, so as you can see, it is not sewn to the piece itself. I did not bother to press the seam. You absolutely can. I just finger press it as I'm sewing, and I just pushed it down. If you would prefer to press it open or to one side, that's totally fine. I've never found that it made much of a difference. Little side note before we go on. As I mentioned earlier, because these pieces are so big, a lot of times you'll miss spots with your interfacing when you're fusing. So as I've been doing each step, I've kind of been checking and making sure that everything is fused down. What can happen if you don't have your pieces fully fused, especially towards where you're gonna be sewing seams, is that as you're sewing this can kind of bubble up and you can get little puckers and wrinkles in your fabric. So just kind of check it as you go. Be assured it is not you, it's just something that happens with the interfacing and with big pieces. So now that this is done, I am ready to add on my luggage handle. So before I add my luggage handle on, I am going to take this pocket and just kind of pull that up towards the top. I don't want to sew through that because that would defeat the purpose of this pocket. So I'm just going to clip it up here so it's out of my way. And I'm gonna take my luggage handle, and in the pattern, it's going to give you some measurements. A lot of times I just kind of eyeball it at this point. I've made a lot of these bags and I found that I'm comfortable doing that. You can absolutely just use the measurements that are in there. So you wanna center this. You're going to center it on either side of the zipper. So either find the center of this and the center of your piece, or again, just kind of eyeball it. And I put it about a 1/2 inch or so down from the zipper. I find that that's a good place. As long as I am not catching that pocket that I just sewed, I'm fine. So I'm gonna put this over a little bit, make sure it looks good and it's straight. And I'm gonna use some pins. Again, this can be a little bit hard on your pins. So what I do is I put my pin in and fold my piece back. And then I can push the pin through, and then I'm not bending my pin. So I'll do the same thing over here, put the pin through, fold the piece up, and then push that pin right through. So now that I have this in place, I'm going to go to the sewing machine and again sew in a few different places. And I really want to make sure that this is secure, because this is going to hold my bag while it sits on top of a piece of luggage, and I just don't want that to rip. So I'm going to sew on the top stitching that I did earlier. So I have 1/8 and 1/4. I'm going to do that on both sides. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches. And then I'm also going to come in about 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and I'm going to stitch as well. I just usually use the side of the zipper right here and line that up, and I'll draw a little line. And I'm just gonna stitch back and forth a few times to really secure that. The middle will stay open, just the ends will be sewn down. And again, if you wanna put a box here, or if you wanna add a few rivets, which I might do as well, you can do that. I am going to sew it and then decide if I want rivets, because I really wanna make sure that the rivets are not the only thing holding it in. I would like to have both things holding it together. I stitched my luggage handle on the 1/8 and 1/4 inch lines on the sides here. I also stitched in about 1.5 inches or so, just right up to the edge of where that zipper is. I didn't stitch anything in the center. We want to leave that open. And I had 4 rivets left over in my pack of 20, so I thought I might as well use them. So I just went ahead and put those in there. Adds a little bit of reinforcement, but it's also decorative, and I just thought it, kind of looked pretty. I've got so many on the front and the handles, I thought I would add a few more here. So now this is done, and I can take my clips out, put my pocket down, and I'm gonna give this a press just because this was not pressed at all and it's kind of just pushing up. Once that's pressed, I'll be ready to go on to my next step. Step 13 is to finish up the front and back of your bag. So I have my 2 top pieces. These are my A's with my short handles. I grabbed my 2 G pieces, which are my bottom pieces. Mine are cork, yours might be fabric. And I also have my front as well as my back. So to put these together, I'm just gonna show you on one, and then you'll repeat that with your other half as well. I'm just gonna grab my front, grab one of my tops and one of the bottoms. I like to get this all prepared so I can take it to the sewing machine and do all of my stitching at once. I'm going to be sewing and then also top stitching. And here's just an extra note for you. If you have any extras around your sewing machine, any little extra, trinkets or anything like that, this is a good time to move them out of the way. As you might have noticed, this bag gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to keep getting bigger until it's time to finally make it smaller as you're finishing the bag. So just so that you don't knock anything over, like I have some little jars and things, I'm just gonna get them out of my way. So first thing I'm gonna do is take my top here, and I'm going to put it right side down on the top part of the bag. So the top of the bag is going to be above the flaps. On the back, it would be above the zipper. So I'm just going to place that here and use some clips and just clip that in place. Now, at any point during these finishing steps, if you find that any of your pieces are not the same size, what I find is best is to finish up the sewing part. Sometimes things will shift a little bit and stretch when it's sewing. So if it's a minor, little 1/4 of an inch here and there, sometimes it'll work itself out. If it's a lot and something has gone wrong, check and see if maybe something is not cut too large. You can absolutely trim everything down, but what I like to do is just trim it once this is an entire unit. Then I can trim it, I can measure out from the center, make sure everything's good, and I can straighten up my sides. As of right now, everything seems to be lining up, so I'm not concerned. But if you are, remember in bag making, as long as the outside and the lining are the same size, you're good to go. So this is ready to go. I'm gonna stitch this 1/4 inch all the way across here, making sure to backstitch. And I'm also going to put my bottom on the same way. So I'm gonna take the bottom, again, right sides together. I'm just gonna move that handle so it's not in my way. This is aligned at the bottom of the pockets on the bottom of my front piece. And just add my clips. I'm just gonna take this over and do the same thing with the back. Do my 1/4 inch. And then I'm gonna take this to the ironing board and I'm going to press it as best as I can. With all of the bulk of the pockets and the cork and everything else, sometimes getting a really crisp seam doesn't work out so well. And I found that it doesn't really matter which way I press it. So I'm just gonna make sure it looks nice. If my seam is up or down or it's not totally the same, I'm not gonna be that concerned about it. So I'm going to repeat this with the back and then I'm gonna take them to the sewing machine and sew, again, 1/4 inch all the way across the top and all the way across the bottom, making sure to backstitch. So I finished my front and back. I took these to the machine. I sewed my top and my bottom to each piece, right sides together, pressed it as best as I possibly could, and I just top stitched down on the bottom edge here on the cork, my G piece. I don't really like to top stitch up here. I don't like how it looks when it stitches over the bottom of the handles. It's totally up to you if you want to do that or if you want to top stitch here. I just find that I don't really need it and I don't like how it looks, so I didn't do it. So here's my back and there is my front, all complete. So now it's time to start assembling the bag. Now that we have everything together, our handle is done, our tabs are made, our front and back are done, and the lining is ready. So I'm going to grab my lining piece, my zipper, lots of clips and pins, and we'll start putting our bag together. For step 14, we're going to add the outside zipper. So now that all of our pieces are done, it's time to start assembling. And the bag is still going to stay kind of large for a little bit until we get the zipper installed and then start to make it a little bit smaller. So again, if you haven't already cleared off a spot around your sewing machine, make sure that you don't have anything that's going to be in the way, preventing the bag from moving while you're sewing or that you're going to knock over. I say this a lot because I used to teach this at one of my local quilt shops, and when you're limited on space, it can be kind of a tricky bag. So I already went ahead and cleared myself a little spot there. I have zoomed my camera out as far as I can. I hope that you are able to see everything nice and clear. So I'm gonna give you some of the tips that I have learned along the way of making this bag that will hopefully make these finishing steps for you easier. As of right now, if you have had no issues with needles or your machine skipping stitches or anything, keep going the way that you're going. As we get into these thicker layers and we get going a little bit further, especially when we start to create the shape of the bag, if you need to, change your needle, increase your stitch length, try a different foot, try different things before you get frustrated. This is kind of towards the end of the bag. We only have a few steps left, but these last steps can be kind of tedious. They're big, there's several of them. What I mean by that is like when we get into our corners, typical bag corners, we have 4. On this one, we have 8, and that will make sense real soon. So just kind of take your time. This is not necessarily a bag that you want to do start to finish in one day. Take your time. You can watch this video over and over again as many times as you need. So I've gone ahead, I've grabbed one of my outside pieces. I started with the front. It really doesn't make any difference. I have my zipper, which we'll go over in a minute, a few things to know about zippers, and I have one of my lining pieces. Again, I am using waterproof canvas for my lining. It is a little bit heavier. I think my machine's gonna be just fine with it. It seems to take the thickness pretty well. If you have cotton, this should have interfacing as well as fusible fleece on the back. Remember, the interfacing is the entire size of the piece. The fusible fleece is going to be short, so it's not caught in the seam allowance. So I just have one of each of the bag pieces and I have my zipper. So let's talk about zippers for just a minute. Up until I had my own zippers, I use the By Annie double zips. They are a number 4.5 per zipper. They have stoppers on either end and they are a double zipper. The 30-inch length works perfectly. If you have a longer one, I think there's also a 36, that's fine too. Having a longer zipper is not a bad thing because we are going to sew over it and cut it down when we're done. So I'm using the Zipper by the Yard. I've already added my zipper pulls. I do have a quick video on the channel if you want to watch some tips on putting them on. And I went ahead and I sewed the ends. If you're using a pre-made purchased zipper that has the metal stoppers, those are totally fine. We're gonna make sure that we don't sew over those. So again, you'll need at least a 30-inch zipper for this. I went ahead and cut mine a little bit longer because I could, because I had zipper by the yard. So what I like to do with this bag is I like to get these pulls completely out of my way. Personally, I like sewing with my zipper closed. So what I do is I just move the pulls all the way down to one end. If you would prefer to have your zipper open, you can very easily open it and have a pull on each end. I just like to do it like this. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is pull this handle down. That is gonna be in my way and I don't want that to get caught in the seam. So I'm just going to use a clip and I'm gonna use the edge of my pocket here, my flap, and I'm just gonna clip that out of the way. So I'm gonna be working along this top edge. Now, when I am ready to take this to the machine, I will have my outside, my zipper, and my lining all pinned or clipped together. I like to do it one at a time though. So I'm going to take the lining and just move that out of my way. And I'm just going to work on these two pieces, the zipper and the outside. If I pin this and get it perfectly in place, it's easier to add the lining. If you try to do everything at once, most often this is what's going to move and it's not going to be where you want it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put my poles down here, make sure they're hanging off the edge. And I've got plenty of room here, so I'm just gonna scoot that over a little bit. If I'm going to use pins for this, I will suggest that you pin like so. Take your pin and put your pin downward. You want it going like this. The reason is, if your pin is up here, you can see it. When we add the lining, if your pin is down here, you won't be able to see it, and I don't like sewing over pins, so I would rather have them where I can actually see them once the lining is on. So I'm just working my way along. I am pinning one edge of the zipper, right side down, so the zipper and the outside are right sides together, right along here. I'm just gonna pull this a little closer to me. And I'm just taking my time aligning this edge. This is perfectly aligned right up at the top. And we discussed earlier, if you had any trimming to do, you want to do it before this. You want to make sure that your bag pieces are all the same size. If anything has shifted and your bag pieces are not the same size, change that now. Make sure that you do any trimming before you sew your zipper in. Because if your pieces do not have the same measurements in width, it's going to cause you some issues for these final steps. So now that that is pinned in place, now I'm going to grab my lining, and my lining is going right side down. So I have my outside and my zipper right sides together. My lining and my outside are also right sides together. And I'm not removing those pins. I'm leaving them in. I've already gotten my zipper where I want it. I'm just gonna add more pins or clips. Since I'm using the waterproof vinyl canvas, I'm just gonna grab some clips. So again, I'm lining this up right here, and I'm just gonna add some clips to keep everything in place. The better you clip and pin these pieces together, the nicer it's gonna look when you're done, and you spend so much time working on this bag already, you don't wanna skimp now. So even though it might seem like overkill, put as many in as you need. I'm gonna come down here and line this up. Sometimes because of the handle underneath pushing it, it feels like the pieces don't fit, but they do. I check them. So I'm just working my way along. There we go. You have bulk down here that's kind of pushing, so don't be afraid of that. So now that I have this ready, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way across here. Make sure you backstitch. If you need to roll this bottom piece up so that it's not in your way, do that. When you're done with this part, you're going to take this to the ironing board and you're going to pull your pieces back so that the other side of your zipper is exposed. Give it a good press and top stitch. And I'll show you what that looks like before I top stitch. I would not suggest top stitching both sides at once, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So I'm gonna go sew and I'll come back and show you how that looks. I stitched my outside front and my lining piece to half of my zipper. After I was done sewing, I sewed 1/4 of an inch all the way across here. I took it to the iron and I pressed it as best as I could, and I top stitched. So let's just look at a few things that can happen just so that you don't have any panic while you're making your bag. I do think that this is one of the most challenging parts of the bag only because it's big. It's a long seam that we're sewing and it's bulky. So first of all, don't be afraid to sew in from each side. If you have to pick up the piece and flip it around, you do not have to start and end all in one pass. And I did. I picked mine up. I got to about the middle. I just felt like it was, you know, shifting a little bit. So I picked it up and I flipped it around and I sewed from this side in. Doesn't make any difference. And I do that on a lot of bags. Rather than have something shifting and having to trim or having any puckers, I'll just flip the bag over and sew it from the other side. I pressed as best as I could, and what you want to make sure of is back here, and because I have waterproof canvas, it's not totally flat, it's pretty good, but you don't want this, especially on the lining side, to come up here and get caught in the zipper teeth. That's going to be a big problem for using your bag. You don't want your zipper to get caught on there, and I can open and close my zipper with no issues. My zipper is not 100% straight. It's pretty straight. It might look straight to you, but I can see that there's a couple of spots where it shifted and it wiggled a little bit. The best part about this bag is when it's done, the zipper sits on the top and it's not that noticeable. So unless you have a really big part where, you know, something has skewed or it's affecting the use of the zipper, if you are not perfectly straight, it's not a big deal. So don't stress about that. Now, I told you that it's easier to do your top stitching on this half now than waiting to do the top stitching once the other half is on. The reason is we're going to add the other piece of outside and the other lining piece to this, press it, and do the same thing after we sew. When it comes time to top stitching, this is already here on this side of the zipper. Now I have pieces on this side of the zipper. I have to kind of roll this up and get this out of my way, really get it into the bed of the machine, and sometimes depending on what machine you're using, that can be more challenging than others. So I would rather do this half, get it top stitched. At least that one was pretty easy. The second one is going to have a little extra challenge, but think of it like quilting a quilt. You see people that do free motion quilting on their machines and they're doing big queen size quilts because they're rolling them up. That's all you're gonna do. So I'm going to show you how to put on your next two pieces, and then I'll show you how to get it ready for top stitching. So let me grab those. Okay, so I have my back of my bag and I also have my other lining piece. And I'm not doing anything with the zipper right now. I'm leaving it closed. I'm leaving the pulls down on one end, still hanging off the bag. I'm going to take this handle again and pull it down. And since I have the luggage handle here, I'll just tuck it underneath there. Try to keep it as flat as I can. Now I'm going to take the back of my bag and I'm going to put it right side down with the front. So my two outside pieces are right sides together. I'm lining up the edges here and I'm going to add my pins just like I did the first time. You can do pins or clips. I like doing pins for this part. If you're using a material that you can't pin through, obviously you can use clips. Just pinning. Again, my pins are coming from the top down so that I can see them once I get my lining piece on. This is super bulky in the middle. The handles are pushing against everything. So what I like to do to make sure it all lines up is do a couple inches on this side, move over here, line this up, do a few inches here, and then it helps so I can kind of fuss with the middle. And I know that everything's gonna lay flat when it's done. The handles are just a pain, they're just in the way. Here's another little thing that you can do. If it helps, take a clip and clip the sides. Just keeps everything together, keeps it from moving. Put some more pins. Just lining up the second side of my zipper with the back of the bag. Maybe one more pin. Okay, everything feels good. So now I'm going to take this entire piece and I'm going to flip it over. This is the right side of my vinyl. It might be hard to tell since I have the waterproof canvas, but this is the right side. The inner facing or the back side is on the back here. I'm going to take the other piece of lining, right sides together. So I have right sides together on the lining, right sides together on the outside. For some reason, this always seems to be the part that gets a little bit confusing. When you have it ready to take to the sewing machine, you should see either the interfacing or the back side of your fabric. You should not see the right side of any fabric. If you do, something is in place incorrectly. I'm just adding some clips. And now I'm going to do the same thing I already did, except I have a lot more bulk here. And I'm probably going to do the sew in from one side and then sew in from the other. I just find it a lot easier. Take your time. This is not a race. Okay, so I'm ready to go. I'm going to, again, sew 1/4 of an inch along the edge of this zipper, making sure to back stitch. Then I'm going to pull the pieces around, press it, and get it ready for top stitching. I finished stitching, but I didn't do my top stitching yet because I just wanted to show you. Again, it's huge. This bag is enormous, but it's about to get smaller. So don't worry, this is the biggest that you're gonna have to deal with it. So I have my 2 pieces here sewn right sides together. I have my 2 outsides both facing up with my zipper. Here's my zipper right here. So my zipper is right side up, my 2 outsides are right side up. When I look at the back here, my 2 lining pieces are right side down and my zipper is right side down, so I can see everything. So all of my interfacing and my wrong sides are facing towards each other. So how do I top stitch this half? Well, this half of the bag is gonna go to the left of the machine. It's gonna be hanging off of that side of the machine. But what do I do with all this? So I just take this and I'm just gonna roll it. I can always go back in and press, and I'm just gonna kind of roll this half. It all depends on how much room you have in your machine. I'm just adding a few clips here, and by doing that, it should help me to get this into the bed of my machine and help me top stitch. So I'm gonna take this over, I'm gonna do my top stitching, finish this up, and then I'll show you how to start making this monster smaller. Okay, so I'm all top stitched and ready to go. It really was not that bad. I definitely suggest that you roll your pieces, use some clips. It really does help, even if you have a smaller machine. I am using my Janome 15,000, which has a pretty good sized bed. The throat space is really nice, so it's not horrible, but even if you have a small machine, you can definitely do this. So, 2 good pieces of news. We're getting closer to getting a finished bag. We're gonna start to make this monster smaller. And the other thing that I love is that we're done with top stitching. So the top stitching on either side of your zipper, that's it. You don't have any more top stitching to do. Everything else that we're gonna do is just going to be a finishing step. So what we need to do is pull these zipper pulls into the bag and leave it open, okay? Step number 1. Otherwise, we will not be able to turn this bag when we're done. So get your zipper pulls into the bag, leave yourself an opening. Step number 2, we're gonna take the outside bottoms, so it's my cork pieces right here, pull those together and add some clips, okay? Essentially, this is a giant boxy pouch. If you've never made a boxy pouch, welcome. This will be your biggest ever. If you've made a boxy pouch, this might make a little bit more sense, so I thought I would mention that. So I have my outside bottoms. These are my outside cork pieces, right sides together. I added some clips. Now I'm going to pull my lining pieces together and do the same thing. Clip right along here. Now, when I take this to the sewing machine, I'm going to be stitching all the way across the bottom of the outside, and I'm not going to stitch all the way across the lining. Just like in any other bag, I need a place to turn. So on the outside, 1/4 of an inch, make sure you backstitch all the way across the bottom. On the lining, I do probably a good 6 to 8 inches on each side, leave a really big opening. This is a big bag and you need to pull it through this opening when you're done. Don't leave a couple inches. Leave yourself a nice large opening. I'm gonna go do that and come right back. So my outside is all sewn together. I've sewed right across the bottom. So these are my two cork edges, my bottom pieces. Those are sewn all the way across. 1/4 inch seam, I backstitched when I started and stopped. My lining is also right sides together. I stitched several inches on each side and I left a big opening in the middle. So those are right sides together here. So now we're gonna start making this a little bit smaller. Finally, we're getting towards those finishing steps. So what you're going to do is you're going to be pulling this bottom seam that you just sewed to your zipper. So what I mean by that is you're gonna take your bag, you're gonna kind of flatten it out, and you're pulling this. This is the right side of my zipper. That's my cork, the bottom. I'm pulling that right in here. And I'm just gonna add a clip. And we do the same thing over here. Pulling this bottom seam to the zipper. So the bottom of the outside is right sides together with the zipper. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the lining. So I'm gonna take the seam that I started here, so it's not a complete seam, this is where the hole in the bottom is, and I'm going to flatten that out and pull this seam to the back of the zipper, okay? Let me get this all sorted out so I can show you how it looks. I have not turned anything, I am just shifting things around. So here is my lining, there's my opening, there's my zipper. My lining, this is the seam I just sewed. The seam is now lined up with the back side of the zipper, so I just kind of put it right towards the center. The outside, same thing. This seam is right to the front of the zipper, so it's right sides together. I have not pressed anything. I didn't do any pressing here at all. It's not really important for right now what we do with this seam because we're not sewing it yet. Now you're going to start to sew these little sections. So this is one section, this is one section, there's 8 total. So what you're going to do, I'm just gonna turn this a little bit, is use your clips, and I'm clipping only the outside. I am not clipping this to the lining. I am flattening this out, okay? This is the bottom of my bag, this is my cork, here's my top piece, my pockets are back here, same here, there's my pockets. So the bottom is nice and flat. I'm kind of making like an X on each side. So you see how now I have the 2 flaps of the outside, now I'm going to have 2 flaps of lining. Just like that. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just smooth everything out. Now you have some seams here. You are not lining them up. They don't align with anything. So don't try to, you have a seam here and you have a seam here. They're not going to line up. That is not what you're doing here. I know a lot of times in bag making and quilting, we have seams that we line up. Not on this bag. All you're doing is flattening these pieces out. This is what makes the construction of this bag unique. There is no drop-in lining. There is no hand sewing of zippers. There's no binding inside. When you turn this bag, all the seams are hidden. You close up your lining like you normally would, tuck it in, call it a day. So now I have 8 sections. I have my outside and my lining. They're not clipped together. This is my cork right here. I'll show you again. So there's my cork, okay? I'm clipping all of these individually. When I take this to the sewing machine, I'm going to sew 1/4 inch, and I'm going to sew all the way until I get very close to the zipper, but I'm not touching it. Do not sew any part of the zipper tape. Get as close as you can, but do not sew onto the tape. So if you are within 1/4 inch from the zipper, that's fine. If you can get right next to it, that's also fine. We don't want to sew on the zipper right now. It's very important. So I'm gonna take this to my machine. I'm gonna sew all 8 of these, and I'll come back and show you how those look. Before I go on to the next step, I just wanted to show you the finished bag again. So maybe some of this will make sense, and if it doesn't, that's totally fine too. If you've ever made a boxy pouch, that is essentially what we're doing here. We're making a gigantic boxy pouch. So if you can see here how I have the cork from the bottom that's wrapping up onto the sides, I don't just have a band across here. I don't have separate pieces. When this bag is complete, there's no binding, there's no drop-in lining, there's no sewing of the zipper. It's done because of the way that we're going to do this. So when you're pinning and clipping this together, it's kind of awkward, it looks a little bit weird, and your brain says this is not how a bag is constructed, but it is. So this is what we're going to start doing next, is start to make it so that the bottom is curving up. And it's actually a fairly easy technique. It just seems complex because the pieces are so big. So I'm gonna show you how to get that all clipped and ready in the next step, but I just wanted to give you one more visual so you can see the finished bag. Okay, I have all 8 of my sections sewn, so you can see nothing is sewn together. My lining and my outsides are still loose. I have 2 sections on each side, so 4 here and 4 here, so I have 8 total. So over here, where the zipper is hanging out, I did not sew across here. You can see that this is still completely open, okay? And that's what you want, because right now we're gonna close it. Warning, this is the thickest seam in the entire bag. I'm gonna give you a lot of tips to make sure that you don't break a needle, but the main thing you need to do is take it slow. Do not go as fast as you can when sewing. There is the outside, the zipper, the lining, and we're adding our tabs. Now my tabs are made out of canvas, so I just added my, I gave myself a little extra challenge because now I have extra thickness. But I need to sew through all of these and make sure that my tabs are secure so that I can use my long handle. So if you want, what I like to do is to trim my zipper off now. If you are not comfortable trimming the zipper off and you want to wait, that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and just trim it even with the edge of the bag. If you would prefer to sew first and then cut it, that is totally up to you. It's not gonna hurt anything. So I trim the ends of my zipper off, and I have the outside of my bag facing me. If you do it this way, you will not have your tabs in the wrong place. You don't want your tabs to end up inside the bag. So my outside, my cork, my bottom, my outside is facing me. I'm gonna take my tab and put it into that opening this way. So the metal part is going into the bag. And my opening is a little bit tight. If I have to snip a couple stitches, I will do so. Okay, I'm good. I just had to turn that sideways. So maybe I might have to, okay, there we go. So I'm gonna push this in just like that. And now this is my lining. It's not on my lining side, it's on the outside. So there is my cork. It is on the outside part of the bag sitting on top of the zipper. So now I need to sew through all these layers. Now, if I had my industrial machine, this would be a whole lot easier, but I don't have that with me today. I have my 15,000 and it's going to be fine. Here's a few things that I want you to try when it's time to sew. Increase your stitch length. My normal stitch length is about 2.5. I'm gonna bump this up to 3. I'm gonna make sure that I have in a 90-14 needle. If I haven't changed my needle in a while, I'll change that. I'm gonna try different feet because sometimes just using a different foot will help. Try a walking foot. And when it comes to the center, where this seam and the zipper and everything meets, hand crank. Use the hand wheel on your machine and take some stitches, because if you feel resistance, you can stop. If you're sewing through that and you don't know there's resistance, you're going to break your needle. And I'm flattening out my seams here. So what I like to do if I'm having a problem and this is too thick, I have to get across it once. I have to at least sew one time to get the tab in place. Then what I'll do is sew back and forth over here where it's not as thick, back and forth over here where it's not as thick. As long as you get across that seam once and close everything up, you're fine. And you'll see my seam stops here and it stops here. I need to close that up just like on the lining. And the lining stops a little bit further out. I'm not sure why I couldn't get as close with my lining, but I need to make sure that I am closing that seam completely. So let me show you one more time over here. And once you get through this thick seam, the rest of them are not going to be as thick. This is the thickest part of the bag, but it's only a couple inches. So again, my outside is facing me. This is the outside of my bag. That's where my tab needs to go. My tab needs to end up on the outside, so it needs to start on the outside. It should not be on the lining. I'm putting it into the opening. I let it hang out a tiny bit so I can see it because I don't want it to kind of fall inside. I'm using my fingers to straighten out that seam. I'll do the same thing with the lining. I'm adding a clip, and I'm adding a couple more clips to make sure nothing moves. And take this to my machine, sew across here to close up that opening, and I'm gonna stitch on either side of the zipper and the fixed seam to really secure that. I'll come back and show you how that looks. My tabs are sewn in, so let's go over again. I'll show you exactly what I did, and hopefully that will help you out. I don't want you to break a needle, so instead of sewing and breaking a needle and having any issues, I hand cranked pretty much the entire thing. What that does is it allows me control to go slow enough to make sure that my needle is not hitting anything. Sometimes it's not the thickness. There could just be part of this area that the needle doesn't want to penetrate through, and so you just want to take your time with that. So I had a couple of spots where I kind of had to adjust. One side was easy and one side was a little bit more challenging. I can't answer that. I don't know why that is, but I got through it. So I actually hand cranked twice. So I did stitch the entire seam 2 times. And if you can see here, I went back and forth on either side of the tab. You want this tab to be sturdy. You want it to be strong, because if you're carrying this bag on your shoulder, that tab is holding the entire weight of your bag. So I also went in just outside of my seam allowance, and I stitched a little bit more just to kind of secure that. Now this is from the outside. On the lining side, just to double check here, I wanted to make sure that I closed up that area, and some of my seam allowance was not perfect, but it is closed, and that's what you want to happen because you don't want a hole here. If there's a hole here, you can lose things in your bag or you could tear something. Same on this side. I closed everything up. Let's turn it this way. I sewed a little bit in the seam allowance. I sewed all the way across here. I made sure that everything was closed. So now I am ready to go on and cut and make my corners. So I've gone ahead and drawn out my corners as per the pattern on step 18, and I want to talk to you about those before we do any cutting. So when you use your ruler, be careful if you have the kind of ruler that has that extra 1/2 inch, like this Creative Grids. Just be really cautious about your measurement. So you're going to take the measurement that's in the pattern and you're going to draw this out, and I would suggest drawing these, not just taking them to your cutting mat. And you're going to be measuring from the fold and from the seam. Do not measure from this edge here, okay? So each of these boxes is drawn measuring from the seam and the fold. It seems a little bit weird, but you need to do that to accommodate for the seam allowance. So I've drawn the boxes on all of my outsides. Excuse me. I also did my lining pieces, and now I'm going to cut them, and I do them individually. So if you take this to your cutting mat and do this with your rotary cutter, don't cut through both layers. They might not be perfectly aligned and your corners could be off a little bit. So take your time, do them all separately. And if you are using a rotary cutter, just be really careful when you get right in here to this intersection. In the center, you don't want to take your rotary cutter and cut too far and make a tear in your bag. So I'm just going to cut these by themselves, one at a time, cut all 8 of them. Now I did take this after I made my marks back to my sewing machine. There's always like one thread that doesn't want to come out. There we go. And I did reinforce this seam right here just so I wouldn't have to worry about it coming out. So after I drew and I knew where I was going to be cutting, I just took a few stitches right there just to make sure that that seam was reinforced. You are going to be cutting into some of your seams. Be careful, don't pull on this too much, because if you pull these seams apart, you're gonna have to go back in and fix them. And you can right now, but once you start putting your bag together, it can be kind of hard to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut all the rest of these, and then I'll show you how to straighten them out. And believe it or not, your bag is almost done. All 8 of my corners are all cut, and now my bag looks a little bizarre. Does not look like much of a bag at this moment, but we're getting close to the end. So what do you do with all of this? Did I just waste all of this fabric? No, not necessarily. You can actually take this and open these up, give them a press, trim them down, and you can use these to make an extra little bonus zippered pouch. Instructions for that are included in the back of the pattern. I'm not going to go over that in today's video because it's just a really simple zipper pouch, but you have enough here to do 2. So by all means, you do not have to throw these out unless you want to. You have permission to toss them in the garbage. For now, I'm just going to get them out of my way. So now that I have my bag looking like this, it looks a little funky. And what we just cut are the corners. So let me grab the finished bag and try to explain what we just cut. So if you've made any bags before that have box corners, your box corners are typically down here on the bottom. So your bag would come down, it would cut in, make that square, right? Well, in this case, to make the zipper have this arch to it and to make it look like this, our corners are actually right here. So the corners are actually top to bottom. They're not down the side. That's why there's 8. 2 in the front, 2 in the back, same with the lining. I hope that helps to make a little bit more sense. Again, it's a giant boxy pouch. That's all that it is. So once you have these all cut, you're gonna take your clips and you're going to gently, so that you don't lose any of your seams, very gently pull these apart. So I'm going to be taking these inside corners and straightening them out. But before I do, I'm gonna reach in here and unzip the rest of the way. It just helps to give you a little bit more room, and I can feel my tabs. There they are on the outside. So now what I'm gonna do is one at a time, take these and straighten them out. And what I do is just kind of push the lining out of the way. I like to do the outside first because the outside has seams that I want to be really gentle with. So here's a seam. I'm gonna put a clip right on it. I don't wanna lose that seam and make more work for myself. Straighten this out. And again, the seams don't line up. None of your seams are going to line up. Your top seam from your A piece where your short handles are, that's going to be up towards the top. You can see here's my seam right here. It's not quite at that point, but that's okay. So there's one. So let me do another one so you can see. So again, I have my weird T shape here, and I am just straightening out like this. I'm making a nice long edge, being real careful with these seams. And I have a lot of people that like to do this, you know, do a couple corners at a time, sew them, come back, clip more, that's fine. Me, I like to get them all cut and all clipped at the same time so I can just go sit at the sewing machine, listen to some music, and sew all 8 of these corners. So once you get these 8 corners sewn, it's time to turn the bag, and the only thing left is to close the lining. So that's the exciting part. There's no more top stitching. So there's the back half of my bag. I'm gonna turn this over, move my lining out of the way, and again, here is my corner. I just want to straighten this out, and I'm just trying to get this lining piece out of the way. Okay, you should have a nice long edge, and when you look at the back of your pocket should be going in the same direction that it will be in the finished bag. It starts to get a little hard to tell where you're at just because you have so many corners here. And now the bag is starting to get some dimension to it. It is getting smaller, so our bag's not so giant anymore, but it's getting wider. So it's not as long, but it has some thickness to it. Oops. And if you have regular cotton for your lining and your fusible fleece has come unstuck at all, it happens, go over to the ironing board and get that back in as best as you can. Okay, so there's my outside. Now I'm going to do my lining. I just keep turning until I can get a good angle. So when I look at the side here, here's my side, my little seam. This is the bottom. This is actually where I'm going to be turning the bag. And I'm just straightening it out. I don't worry as much about the lining because I only have the one seam. I don't have anything I really need to reinforce. I'm just gonna take my time, get this all clipped. Okay, I'm all clipped. It looks like absolute mess, but it is ready to go. So now I have 8 corners that I need to sew, 1/4 inch, making sure to backstitch. Again, they are not sewn to each other. They are all sewn individually. And if it helps you, excuse me, if it helps for this step, if you get a little bit lost and you're not sure where you're pulling and straightening everything out, in the pattern, it does show you how to make some little marks, like a little X or a little dot on the inside corner. So where you've cut, if you just kind of put a little dot on both sides, at least you know which ones you're pulling out. It'll help you to line things up. If it helps you to do a couple at a time, do that. I have all of mine ready to go. It does not look like anything at the moment, but it is. The only thing that I'm not stitching is this giant opening in the bottom. I'm leaving that. So I'm gonna head over to the machine, sew each of these with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'll be back to turn it right side out. Okay, I am all sewn. Everything went really smoothly. I would say the only slight issue that I had was just with the waterproof canvas, because I am sewing on the rubber side of it, and my machine was not super happy with my decision because I wasn't using a Teflon foot. So other than that, other than the waterproof canvas getting a little bit hung up, which is not a big deal at all, everything went really well. I've got all my corners sewn. I still have this hole in the bottom that I'm gonna use to turn everything. So I just like to double check, make sure everything looks good, and I think it's time to turn the bag. So I already unzipped my zipper as far as it would go, and I'm just gonna kind of roll the lining back, pop everything out, try not to rip anything as I'm turning. I love this waterproof canvas inside. It's such a bright, happy color. I don't like using dark linings in my bags. When I used to make bags for people, they would always ask for dark linings to keep things clean. And I thought, but how do you find anything? So I like a bright lining. And I'm gonna put my hand right into the hole of the lining and really poke these corners out. When I first bought this teal colored cork, I didn't really like it. I'm not a teal fan, but it has grown on me so much and I have used it so many times and I absolutely love it. So I'm gonna poke these corners out. I'm checking as I'm going, making sure everything looks good. Oh, okay. You ever have that happen where it's just a part of the print that's showing through, but it looks like a hole? I just had a very small little heart palpitation, but it was just a white part of a flower showing through, not a hole. Okay, so I am just about done. The only thing I have to do now is close my lining. So just like I normally would, I'm just gonna fold these edges under. And I mean, I guess technically I don't even have to since it's waterproof canvas. Most people say it doesn't fray, some people say it does. What do you think? Where is your standpoint on waterproof canvas? Have you used it? Do you think it frays? I think it frays a little bit, but I would not be uncomfortable leaving a raw edge inside of a bag because I don't think it's gonna fray that much that it would bug me. But for now, I'm just gonna fold the edges under. All I have to do is take this over, stitch it, and give this one final press. And I'm not gonna make you wait on that. I'm just gonna tuck this inside, pretend it's already sewn. And I'm gonna show you how I like to press this to really get that boxy, square feel to the bag. So, all right, one more clip. All right, so that's all sewn, right? No, so I'm just gonna sew that about 1/8 of an inch, close it up, and then I'll tuck it in. And then what I like to do is take this to my machine and I'll kind of put it right on the side of the machine and the ironing board, and I'll fold this edge like this and press, fold this seam right here and press, and I even will press a crease down here in the cork. Makes it really, gives it like a really good shape to it. So I'm gonna go close up my lining, give it a press those seams, and I'll be back to show you the finished bag. I'm all pressed. I closed up my lining, so I just tucked that down in there, just close that about 1/8 of an inch. It's not the neatest sewing I've ever done, but that's totally fine. My hair is on here. So I learned a few things from this bag. Definitely don't know if I would add the rivets to these top handles. I love how it looks, but I wasn't really thinking, and the bag being flat here, this is actually kind of pulling it up. I guess I'll have to see over time. Maybe next time I can add them in a different place or just add them as decoration. I'm not sure how I feel about that right now. I liked how it looked when it was flat. Now that it's dimensional, I'm not sure. I'm kind of on the fence about that. The canvas was super easy to work with. I've worked with it a lot. I have not done anything with canvas and cork and waterproof canvas inside. So this bag is pretty sturdy. It's definitely still soft. So if I need to, tuck this away, put it, in storage when I'm not using it, I definitely can, but it feels sturdy. You can feel the thickness. That being said, this combination is probably not for every machine. I have several Janome machines. I feel comfortable sewing this on any of them. However, I know some of them would do a better job than others. My HD9 would have gone through this bag with no issues whatsoever. I wouldn't have even had to hand crank over here. It would have just zipped right across that without a problem. My 15,000, I was a little bit more cautious. My smaller machine, I probably would have had some issues over here. So you have to know your machine and your machine's limitations before you get into a bag like this, and choose your materials wisely. Choose something that's not going to give you problems. The worst thing you want to happen is to work so hard on making a beautiful bag and not be able to finish it because your machine is not happy. So again, bigger needle, change your foot, increase your stitch length, try different things before you give up. Other than that, I love how this came out. I'm super happy. I love the the rivet detail. I added some rivets back here on my luggage handle. It looks so professional to me. I feel like I could have bought this, or I could tell someone I bought this and they would totally believe me. So I'm really happy. The only thing I wish I had done is to finish my edges with some fabric fusion or edge coat. I do have some spraying of the fabric on the back side of the cork. It's minor, and I could go in and very carefully finish those if I really wanted to. So that's the only thing that I'm a little disappointed in myself for rushing through that. Other than that, I'm super happy with how this came out. I can't wait to see how your road trip bags come out. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. I upload every Friday from Facebook Live around 1, and I put videos like this up as often as I can make them. As I always say, Facebook is for fun, tutorials are for learning, and I hope you learned a lot today. Thanks for joining me.